All right, very good morning and welcome to this session, which basically focuses on the issues of finance. Now, if you were to look at the importance of finance in the whole process, it is not just your ability to fund your education, but it's also to improve your chances of getting visa. Finance and failure to show the right structure of finance and the source of finance is a major reason for rejection of visa across various countries. In this session, what I'm going to be basically doing is giving you an idea of the finance side of it from the visa. And then I'll also be talking about how you can fund your education. But you need to bear in mind that these rules are country specific. I would be focusing on important countries which normally Indian students aim for. In case I do miss out on any country of something that you prefer, you can always write to me. Now, one of the very important things, all countries, and I'm talking about the preferred countries like US, Canada, Australia, Ireland, UK, Germany, you name the country. Every country has one important prerequisite when they are considering whether they should be issuing the permit for a student to enter the country or not. That is the ability of the student to manage their own finances without depending on the foreign society during the studies. So every country puts a condition that you need to show certain funds. Now, you might be basically going for a program which might be a long duration program. Most of the countries have a limit. They say that, all right, even if your program is more than a year, show me that you have funds sufficient for a year. So all these countries would basically ask you for a proof that you have funds sufficient for 9 to 12 months, covering two very important elements, major elements of your expense. One is the academic fees, and the second one is the living expenses. So, as long as you can show those funds and show the source of funds, these country officials, while reviewing your application for visa, are going to be more than satisfied. Let me cite an example. I'm going to be talking about currency in terms of Indian currency because depending on which country you are focusing, the currency will obviously change. So let me generalize that by taking an Indian currency. Let us say you are opting for a program which is 2 year long masters, and the fees for that is, let us say, 20,000 rupees per year, which basically means that you probably are going to spend 40,000 rupees for your academic fee during the whole program. Let's also say that on a monthly basis, you need 1,000 rupees for living expenses. Now, what most of the countries will ask for is not the expense for the whole duration of your stay there, normally about a year. In US, for example, they ask for 9 months. Most of the places they ask for a year. So you are supposed to therefore show the fees of 1 year, that is 20,000 rupees, living expenses for 1 year, that is about 12,000 rupees. So 32,000 rupees is what you're supposed to be showing as your capacity to have, so that you can give the comfort to the visa officers that you can survive in that country without depending on anyone else for at least a year. Now, again, do remember 1 year is not a concrete one. For example, I said in the US it's about 9 months. Now, how do you fund this 32,000? They are not going to care. When I say they, I'm basically talking about the college. But from the visa perspective, again, it depends from country to country. For example, let us say the total requirement is 32,000 rupees for a college in UK. The advantage of UK, and that is one of the reasons why UK is considered to be quite friendly from this perspective, is that you can fund the whole thing using education loan itself. So, for example, let us say the requirement is 32,000 and you fund 32,000 through loan, education loan, visa officers are not going to discriminate. They're not going to be saying that, look, you are not putting in your own saving, therefore I will not touch you. Why am I emphasizing this? Because this is going to change from country to country. For example, in Australia, 100% funding through loan is not a good way for you to try to convince them for a visa. Ireland, for example, you need to see to it that at least 30% is funded through your own savings. So the first very important learning that you need to ask yourself is how much is the funds that you need to show. Do remember, you don't need to show the whole quantum, you need to show the minimum that a country is asking for. The second important thing is the funding. How are you funding it? Are you funding through saving? Are you funding through a loan? These days, education loans are not very tough to get. There are a lot of private players, including foreign players, who are willing to extend you the loan or the debt. However, the point that you need to understand, as I just mentioned, not every country is going to be okay with you funding completely using loan. UK being a big exception, and that's one of the reasons I keep talking about UK as a preferred choice for those who basically depend on loan completely. Now, most of the countries have also been increasing the living expenses. For example, Canada has increased, Australia has increased. The reason is very simple: the cost of living has actually, increased a lot, including the rentals over the last few years, which basically means that the amount of money that you are required to show has also been going up over the last couple of years. Now, amount of money and the source of funds. Now, it's very important you understand these two, because quite often students only focus on the amount of funds, not the source of funds. For example, let us say you are a person interested in going to the US. You are supposed to show equivalent of $30,000. Now, maybe you have $30,000. How do you have it? You have it because you have been able to sell a land, or maybe your parents have some savings. So you show the $30,000, including education loan. Now, the point that you need to understand is that show of funds will happen through some documentation. It could be, for example, your bank saving account balance statement. The second thing that you need to understand is when it comes to the saving, it's a source. Source means how have you got that? For example, if your sponsor is your father and he happens to be having a payslip, your mother who has an ITR, all these will talk about the source. So as much as you need to have the funds and the proof that you have the funds, you need to have the source. Here again, the intensity changes. For example, in UK, they are not going to be focusing so much on how have you funded it, as long as you have it. In US, they are going to be looking at whether you have it or not. But the proof that is required for you to show the fact that the funds is US is not as stringent. But when it comes to Australia, when it comes to Ireland, it becomes very stringent. For example, in Australia, you need to be showing the fact that this money has been coming regularly. For example, the Australian VO is probably going to ask for 4 to 6 months of bank statement. Similarly, even Irish. So they are going to be asking about 6 months of bank statement, and then they are going to see if you are claiming that the source is your salary or your sponsor's salary, has it been coming regularly or not? They are going to be also looking at expenses. How much expenses are you having? For example, you might be making good amount of money, but you have your normal family expenses very high. The saving is therefore low. Then the visa officer is probably going to take a call that, look, you will not be able to sustain yourself moving forward. So one of the most important mistakes students do when it comes to the funding side is they look at the funds, but they don't look at the source of funds. Let me cite certain examples. I come across a lot of students whose parents are business people. Now in India, it's quite common, unfortunately so, but it's common that quite a few business people do not declare their income. So they are rich, they have money, but when it comes to the documentation part of it, may that be in terms of income tax returns, it's not very strong. In fact, I have a lot of my students whose parents are in agriculture, farming, for example. they don't even file income tax returns. Do they have the money? Yes, they have the money. So this becomes a classic case of a scenario where a student is able to show that he has some money, but does not have a proof to show the source of funds. So normally, whenever I'm counseling a student, when a student walks in, even at the early stage, I try to find out how they are going to fund and what proofs that they have. So it is very, very important that once you have taken a decision of foreign education, you are considering even the source of fund side of it, because that is not something that you can produce in the last minute. For example, when you are going to the US, it is preferable to have at least 3 years of income tax returns of your sponsors. Is it compulsory? No. But it is preferred, yes, because that strengthens your economic standing case. So if you need 3 years and you have parents or your sponsors have not been filing for that long, it becomes a challenge. Therefore, what is required is, if you are planning to go for higher education, from early stage itself, you need to see to it that these filings are actually happening, so that by the time the whole process is towards the end, you are going for the visa, you have right documentation to convince the visa officer of your ability to sustain yourself while you are studying in their country. So, to sum everything up, first, always find from your advisors not just how much is education going to cost, but also from the visa perspective, how much you need to show and the proof that might be required to show those funds. Remember, they change from country to country. The rigor, the rigor with which they do the scrutiny is very, very different. In my perspective, excuse me, getting a visa in Ireland and Australia requires very strong documentation when it comes to the source of funds. Now, before I go to the how to raise funds, let me also mention one more thing. Depending on the country, when you need to give the documentation would also change. For example, in Australia, most of the universities will ask for the financial statements during the admission process itself. While in the US, during the admission process, you are not asked anything. It is only during the I-20 stage. I-20 stage is a stage that comes after the admission process. You are supposed to show them the source of the funds for them to issue the document necessary for you to fight for the visa. There are a few colleges in the US who, like in Australia, insist on the financial document during the time of the admission itself, but that number is quite negligible. How do you fund? Now, as I was mentioning, one of the very important things that you need to understand is loans are available. Should you fund through your savings? Should you fund through loan? Is a very personal choice that you need to make. Now, obviously, if you are going for education loan, there is a cost associated with it in terms of the interest that you need to pay. Now, how much you need to raise is going to be a function of how much funds you need. So there are certain critical learnings which I'm going to be talking about. Please be aware of it. Point number one. Please do understand, when banks are giving you loan, they are willing to give you anything about 70% of the total requirement to 100% of the total requirement. The definition of total requirement is not just the academic fees. So when you are going to the bank, you can come out with a project cost, and the project cost can include your overall academic fees for the whole program, plus your living expenses for the whole program, plus any paraphernalia that you might require. For example, expense towards textbooks, expense towards a laptop, flight tickets. So all of them can be summed, all right? So it is not just academics. Day before yesterday, I had a parent coming to me and saying, look, would I have to fund the living expenses of all my kid completely there, because I'm going to rely on the loan? The point that you need to understand is, for you, the total expense is the project cost. So once you know how much project cost is there, you can then take a decision on how much loan you need, basis how much amount of saving you already have. In my view, you should try to get as much loan you can without risking your visa as sanctioned. Whether you utilize the loan or not is a choice that you can then take later, depending on how the situation is when you go to a foreign country. I have a lot of my students who go to the country, then end up getting part-time job, and therefore they are able to make that money enough for the living expenses. Thus, they don't actually utilize their the loans that has already been sanctioned. It's all right. Not utilizing the loan is a very good news, because you obviously are not liable to pay that nor pay the interest towards that. And do remember, interest is always paid on the amounts dispersed, not an amount sanctioned. All right. So go ahead, get the sanction, because in case this has been an emergency where you need extra funds, then you don't need to run around. You can use this sanctioned fund to tide over that emergency situation. Second thing, and this is again something that many people are not aware of. Please understand that when you have got a education loan, you do not need to pay the EMI immediately. All right. For example, let us say you have taken some amount of money, you are right now doing your master's. You do not need to pay the EMI. When I say you, it is neither you nor your sponsors. In most of the situation, your EMI will kick in after you get a job, which is normally defined as around 6 to 12 months after you finish your education. So banks tend to give you some time after your degree is over for you to get a job and be prepared to start paying your EMI. But does that mean that from the day you do the disbursement till you get a job, you don't need to pay? No. In most of the cases during that time, banks will ask you for you or your sponsor to bear the interest cost. So you will have to pay the interest amount. But after you finish your master's or your degree and then you get yourself a job, that is when the interest plus principal repayment captured in form of EMI will come into picture. There are, however, few new age institutions, organizations, banking institutions, which have come forward to even reduce this burden. So there are situations where there are some institutions which will say that, look, you don't need to really make any payment till you get yourself a job, which again is linked to when you finish your degree plus 6 months or 12 months. All right. So depending on how your financial standing is, you will have to then take a call on which institution you will have to go to take the loan. The third important point that you need to understand, and many people are getting confused, is this. Whenever you're taking a loan, you have a choice. For example, I recently had a student, there have been many cases like that, who was being offered a loan by one of the institutions in India at about 14%. And then he comes to me and says, "Sir, I'm getting a loan at 8%." And for that, I was a little stunned, because I know the fact that 8% is a very low rate of percentage of loan, interest. For that too, for collateral free loan, he was talking about. And when I started investigating, I started asking questions, I realized the fact that this 8% loan was being given in American dollars. Do remember this fact that when your loan is in a different currency, interest rate has to be seen differently. 8% interest in India is not the same as 8% interest in US. 8% interest in US is much, much higher than 8% interest in India because of the inflation. All right. Also because of the rupee depreciation. So whenever you are taking a loan, and that too in a currency that is different from the home currency, please discuss with some financial expert, understand the consequence of it. I have always believed the fact that taking loan in Indian currency is probably going to be a better deal, considering the fact that Indian rupee is continuing to depreciate and is expected to continue to depreciate. All right. Now, you might not probably understand the finance behind it, but the point that you need to understand is when someone says 8% per annum as interest, do remember it differs from currency to currency. 8% in Indian currency as a rate of interest is much lower than 8% in American. All right. Normally, considering depreciation of about 6%, you could say that 8% American interest rate is equivalent to around 14% Indian interest rate. So this is also something that you need to bear in mind. Finally, one of the things that you need to understand is whom do you take the loan from. You have a lot of choices. You have nationalized banks like SBI, Bank of Baroda. You have private banks in India like ICICI, HDFC. There are private institutions that are giving funds in India. There are a lot of foreign institutions which are also funding in India, Indian students. My preference has always been this. Remember, your liability is going to be chiefly the interest rate. So, as much as possible, try to reduce your interest rate. And the way to reduce your interest rate is to try to go to a nationalized banks. Nationalized banks are very pain in terms of the process, in terms of the duration. However, if you do have time, then you do not need to worry about that. Nationalized banks will provide you the best rate of interest. They are not going to be very flexible, but all right, that's okay if you have time and you have the flexibility to be flexible yourself. So, but go for that. There again, you will have options. Collateral loans will obviously have a lower rate of interest. So, if you do have some property, go for collateral. Don't immediately and impulsively go for non-collateral just because the process is simpler or the duration is shorter. Remember, even a saving of 0.1% in terms of interest rate is a substantial saving for you later. Nationalized banks do provide non-collateral loan too, to an extent. You can utilize that. Otherwise, there are a lot of private players. Try to avoid going directly to international private players because, as I said, international private players will likely give you loan in foreign currency, which is a problem. Second thing that you need to understand also is the fact that they are going to be charging interest rate which probably might not make sense to you. All right. So bottom line is this. Two areas where I would like you people to remember. One is how are you funding for your own self? Second is how are you funding for the visa? Both of these are very important, and these decisions would have to be thought of even before you start the whole process, because depending on what your position is, you might have to rethink on the country that you're going to focus on. Like I said, if you're going to depend on 100% loan, then you cannot think of countries like Australia, you cannot think of countries like Ireland, which are very, very stringent. You can, however, comfortably look at UK as an option. Even US is manageable, but not Australia and Ireland. The second important thing is please think both from the perspective of funding and the source of funding. Source of funding proof becomes very essential in certain countries, and most of the countries will prefer bank statements as well as the ITR or the income tax returns. That is something that you need to have of your sponsors. The final point that you need to understand is when it comes to raising of loan, please see to it that you are not just restricting your expense to the academic expenses, living expenses, flight tickets, other expenses that you might have in terms of buying of books, laptops, etc., can also be brought together. And then you can look at that as the total cost of investment or the project for yourself. Finally, of course, be very careful from whom you are raising the funds in terms of loan to. You need to be professional enough to understand that, nationalized banks might be slow, but in long run, considering the income tax or interest rate that they normally charge, it might still make sense. But of course, a lot of documentation would be sought there. In case you are not in a position to bring that documentation, then there are players who would be comfortable giving you the loan, but they are going to be charging you a little higher interest rate, and probably that is the right solution for you. Finally, I do have one more very important element. Sometimes you also have to be very careful about this while you are choosing a college or a program. For example, there are a lot of institutions which are comfortable lending money for a student going to the US for a computer science program. But if you are going to the US for a program in, say, filmmaking, the same institutions will not lend you. The reason is simple. They differentiate the risk. They believe the fact that if you're going for a STEM program, if you're going for a program which has job opportunities, then you are likely to get jobs, and therefore you'll be in a position to repay, which might not be possible in certain programs which they think as risky. The second very important thing is even the choice of college might impact you there. If the college is well ranked, if the college is well positioned, then banks will be very okay giving you the loan. But the same banks will say no if you end up picking a college which probably is not, in their eyes, a very stable college. So please be very careful even while you are selecting a college, to be aware, that is, if you're depending on the loan, whether anyone will offer you loan for that particular college or not. Do remember, there are amazing number of colleges in all of these countries, and not all the colleges and the programs of all the colleges are going to be funded by someone who is willing to give you a loan. So as you do the whole process, keep in mind the idea of from where you're going to raise funds, or whether you'll be able to get funds, etc. It should not so happen that you have got the admission, everything is done, you have put in all the effort, and later you are told that, look, for this certain programs, no bank is going to be giving you or extending you the financial support. If in that case, the whole process will not be worth it. Okay. So in this session, the whole idea was to give you some tidbits on various fundings. You are free to get in touch with me. I'm writing my WhatsApp number. In case you do have any query on anything to do with finance, if you are having any problem of getting financial help too, don't hesitate to get in touch. Because we have been in this area for a long time, and every year quite a few of our students rely on us to help them raise funds. Our network with the financial institutions is quite strong. Probably we can make a case for you in case you have been struggling to do so. All right, so you're always welcome to get in touch. Please make it a point to join me the next time around. Our endeavor at Condura is to see to it that we are exposing you to certain elements which we would like you to keep in mind while you are doing the whole process of admission. Because I have always believed that going to a foreign country as a student is a big sacrifice both for you and your parents. It's also a big investment from your side, and therefore you should be much better prepared with the rules, the policies, and aware of the changes that are happening, so that you can benefit make the most of the investment and the sacrifice that you are making. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much once again. My WhatsApp number is put there. In case you have any queries specific to yourself, you can always ping me there. Thank you so much.